Welcome to the Kids with Big Emotions podcast. I know I seem excited about our guest. Today, though, is one that I have so many questions for because what she delves into is so unknown in North America. I know that it's a little more known in the UK as far as a diagnosis goes for some of our kids. And my son checks off almost everything on the box. And I've known about this for a few years, and I've resisted actually going in to get my son officially diagnosed because I'm like, oh, because then what's all entitled in that? What loops do I have to go through? How do I have to try to explain this to other people? That I've really avoided it. So I'm super excited to be going into this today. So we have Amanda Preston with us today. And Amanda, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to everybody today.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Amanda. I am a social worker. I'm a parent to 8 neurodivergent kids, including 3 that are autistic and 1 with PDA, which I'll be talking about today. I run a multidisciplinary clinic that focuses on neurodivergence. So we have a specialization in PDA and we try and support families. I'm also the founder of a national nonprofit that supports adoptive and foster families, and I'm an author. And we left the big city behind a few years ago to start a homestead. So that's just a little bit about me.
Amazing. Yeah. And you're also from Canada, which is amazing because most of people, well, I have had some recently from Canada as well. It's great because I often have a lot of US guests.
Yeah.
So, two things you said. So, you talked about neurodivergence and you talked about PDA. Let's just first explain to people what neurodivergence is because I thought it was always autism.
Okay, that's a great question.
I thought it was always autism. And now I've learned that there's so much that falls under that umbrella. So can you give us an explanation for anybody that doesn't know what neurodiverse is?
Yes, I actually just did a workshop on this. So a lot of people actually misunderstand the term neurodiversity and then neurodivergence, and they use it interchangeably. So neurodiversity is sort of the umbrella, and that's just referring to everyone's brain and how diverse they are. And then under that umbrella, we have neurotypical brains and neurodivergent brains. So neurotypical brains would be how the majority of people's brains interact, process, learn, that sort of thing. And then neurodivergent brains are brains that would learn or process or do things a little bit differently. So neurodivergent can actually include a ton of different diagnoses, and not even just diagnoses, but ways that you would connect more with that type of a brain versus a neurotypical brain. So it might be someone who is autistic, ADHD, dyslexia, FASD. The list is, it's long. It's just basically, would you have more in common with a neurodivergent brain or a neurotypical brain?
Yeah. And it's fascinating because this is the world that I live in. So in my world, I'm like, the majority is atypical. I'm like, no, the majority that I know are, have these amazing brains that think so different and are out of the box and are going to change the world. And it's just so fascinating when your life is in this box, in this world, and you start meeting more parents and more kids, and you see this out there. Like, to me, that's all I see. I guess it's kind of like when we're going and we want to buy a new car. And then after we buy, that's all we see on the roads are those cars colors. And maybe that's why I have that blinder on. All right. So then you talked about PDA. So pathological demand avoidance.
Yeah.
And you explain what that is.
Yeah, so PDA is basically a profile of autism. So what it means is when your brain thinks that there is a threat, so kind of that old-fashioned caveman thinking where they had, the brain would respond if you were, going to get eaten by a tiger or something like that. Your brain actually views demands as a threat to that same level. And so it causes kids or adults or whoever it is that's diagnosed with PDA to go into that threat response. And the threat response is the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so what ends up happening is we see kids with these behaviors and these reactions to things that don't quite match because they're not, being threatened by a tiger or anything like that. It might be something as simple as asking them to brush their teeth. So they are perceiving that as a really dangerous thing. And so their nervous system is getting activated. And it's a little bit more than just demands. It's also a loss of autonomy. So kids with PDA don't really understand that hierarchy that, adults are above kids. or older siblings or that sort of thing, and they want to be seen at the same level. And so what ends up happening is a lot of kids, they get misdiagnosed with things like ODD. They might be called manipulative. They might be called, aggressive or naughty. Just a very big misunderstanding of what's going on and what the motivation is behind what these kids are doing. But when really it's their threat response that's just getting activated.
And okay, there's so many things in what you said. So I have some notes that I've been writing down as you're saying that. The one thing that I've found very confusing, and I do want everybody to know that I am not knowledgeable in this. So I'm asking questions as a parent and actually trying to find out information. So one thing I've been sorely confused on is that as you said, it falls under an autism diagnosis. But things I've read is it doesn't present like autism, but it falls under the autism umbrella. So when you get this quote unquote autistic diagnosis, the way that you help this child is different than you would help a child who's autistic, which makes me so confused as to how does this fall under the umbrella of autism?
That does make sense. So yeah, so it's not a standalone diagnosis. It's not in the DSM. It's actually not, even though the UK and Australia are ahead of North America, it's not in theirs either. It's not an official diagnosis there. So
sorry, just on that, the DSM, this has been something learning for me. So the DSM, correct me if I am wrong on this, the DSM is basically a whole list of a book of a diagnosis that a professional can give, and then there are certain supports given for that diagnosis. Is that correct?
It's basically like their manual, and it lists all the diagnoses that are under that DSM, and you have to match the criteria in that book to get that diagnosis, basically. But the DSM is often behind in terms of where research is and that sort of thing. So sometimes, the community might know certain things about a different diagnosis or presentation, but the DSM hasn't quite caught up. So PDA is not in it. So although you can't get diagnosed with PDA, what they can do is a psychologist who's trained in it could diagnose you with autism. So that's the term that is in the DSM that they can assign to kids. And then they would say in the report that it presents in a PDA profile. Now, there's things that are similar, like demand avoidance, which you can see with other diagnoses, like people with ADHD can sometimes have demand avoidance, with FASD, that sort of thing. So there's definitely other diagnoses out there that have kids or adults that, don't like to have demands on them. But PDA, it's got that pathological side because it's really in every aspect of their life. So even though you kind of asked, well, if it doesn't present like autism, they do still have a lot of autistic characteristics. They have to still hit all those DSM criteria, but they might just do it in a way that's a little bit outside the box. You have to kind of think creatively of how they're meeting it, which pieces line up. And they also might mask. That's the biggest reason that a lot of kids end up missing their autism diagnosis, or why families, or professionals don't send them in for a referral for autism, is because PDA kids do have that ability to mask during the day. So at school, things might be looking like things are going fine, but then they come home at the end of the day and sort of erupt or cave into themselves, or however they decide to respond. Well, not decide, but however their nervous system responds to all those demands. And so it gets missed. People don't realize, oh my goodness, they actually do have all these different pieces, and I just didn't realize it.
Okay, my mind's spinning. I have so many questions. I'm glad I'm writing things down. With what you just said too, so with my son, I think, and I don't know, I am a stress coach, right? By trade, like working with first responders. So me understanding stress systems is like tenfold of many other of my colleagues that work in stress with other people. And so I've worked on his stress system since day one, helping his nervous system regulation and all of that stuff. And so when I have spoke with other parents where their child has PDA, the outbursts are where they're like, my son will hit.
Yeah.
So he's decreased that, but it's not, I'm saying, and that's horrible. It's not like throwing things, like it's not breaking things, throwing things. It's not where we have to clear a room. And then also too, like, as I've been working in executive functioning and the way that his brain works and the way that he's processing things, and to work on his perception with that black and white thinking, right or wrong has to be this way or that way. and working on his perception of how he really does see things and understanding it and helping him work on that, I've seen some of his symptoms decrease. They're still there, but I do see them decrease. So that's what stopped me as well from going to get a diagnosis. Have you seen kids? What are the degrees, I guess, of this where they get into that heightened stress state?
Yeah, so it can really vary for each kid. And you have to remember the threat response has a lot of, it has those four main categories. So fight is definitely one that is, I would say, often the easiest to recognize when kids are, breaking things or kicking holes in the wall and that sort of thing. But you also have freeze, you also have flight, and you also have fawn. So you might see a child running off to their room. You might see a child with situational mutism. You might see a child really into people pleasing and trying to have that perfectionist side to them. So there's a lot of different areas that they can still be having that threat response and it not look so volatile. But on top of that, like you mentioned, if you're already doing a lot of work to support your child, then some of those things might not be as amplified, because what we often see with kids with PDA is parents didn't know about it for, a long time. And so they were parenting more in a traditional way, and their kids reached burnout. And once they find out about PDA and the approach of low demand parenting and that sort of thing, and they can start lowering those demands, a lot of those things actually subside. They can still happen, but they might not happen as often. They might not be happening in all instances. Some families just naturally start to, as they're navigating some of these big behaviors, might naturally go to that low demand approach or supporting their kids' executive functioning. And so things start to get a little bit easier anyhow. So it doesn't mean that you might not still have that profile of autism. Like you might still have the PDA piece, but it's just that you are doing things in your home to help manage it. So you would just still need to, if you were seeking a diagnosis, you would just still need to be able to show, first of all, how they meet that DSM criteria. We have a form that we like to send out to everyone. It's just a DSM list where you can come up with examples that you see in your child under all the DSM criteria, and then just how they respond to demands throughout their day. So maybe he's not kicking holes in the wall, but are you having a lot of challenges around a lot of different areas of your life with demands? So, brushing your teeth or doing a chore are, some of the easier ones, but what about doing homework or going to a class that they even enjoy, or even using the bathroom? It could be, any number of demands, following rules, instructions, even having a hard time just answering questions, because that's a demand. So if you're seeing some resistance to those in a lot of areas, then that might be a sign that PDA is going on. But if you're only seeing it in a few areas, it could just be something like demand avoidance related to another diagnosis, especially if you're not seeing any of those autism traits at all. So it's a little bit, complicated, which is why it helps to find a psychologist who's trained in it and knows how to look through all of that.
I feel like this episode is all for me. And I'm asking you questions like, this is truly like, this is what I would be asking you if I was literally like having a one-on-one consultation with you, because it stumped me. But everything you say, so this thing with respect too, I mean, my husband's a police officer. And my son would never think that, like, if any of my husband's colleagues or whatever said or did something that my son was like, well, that doesn't make sense, or I'm not following that. He just wouldn't, even if it's a police officer in a uniform telling him to do it. Right. Yeah. And yeah, but everything you're saying, like every check mark he ticks every check mark I've seen. I think actually there was one check mark on one thing that I did see that he didn't tick, but one ever on any PDA thing that I've ever looked at. Yeah. So let's work on transitioning other parents into this that may not have a child just like mine. So with other parents, so as you said, and I see this as well, where people aren't necessarily trained in stress systems and understanding how they can go. So when I speak about stress systems, I speak about a dolphin, and then we have a shark and a clownfish for the anxiety and not being able, like, needing to know things, struggling with change, or the shark always on alert on the prowl. And then we have down where we have the turtle. So that's where I explain it to people. But let's say their kid is in one of those, or as you were saying, flight, freeze, fawn, and what was your fourth one? I believe you have
Fight, fight, freeze, fawn.
Fight, freeze, fawn. Okay. So they're similar, right? Those are the same thing as mine. And so when we have a parent that's seeing these things in their child, why are the traditional styles of parenting not working for this child?
Okay, so if you can imagine the escalation cycle for a moment, I don't know, how familiar all parents are with it, but imagine you have a straight line and that's your baseline. And then you are going up that escalation cycle. So you're in the yellow zone, you're not quite at crisis yet. Up at the very top of that triangular point would be crisis. Then after the crisis, you come down, you're back in the yellow zone. You're actually going to drop below your baseline to the gray zone, and then you're going to come back up. So what we see is when kids are having that threat response, which a lot of parents will refer to as, a tantrum or that sort of thing, it's actually them having a panic attack. And so what parents mistakenly do, which makes sense because of the way that we would traditionally parent, is let's say they have just had a threat response, which we don't realize is happening, and they start to get escalated and they get up into that crisis zone, that top point, and they start breaking things. It's our natural response to want to go up to them right at that moment and say, no, we don't do that. That's not okay. You're going to be grounded for breaking these breakable items. You're going to have consequences, yada, yada. And so our response is to want to deal with it right there, but they're still in that crisis stage. So we are, first of all, responding to them way too soon. And so what happens is they end up staying in that crisis zone. The next mistake a lot of parents make is they might wait until they're not in the crisis zone. They're coming down into that yellow zone, but they're still in the yellow zone. And if you confront someone that's still in the yellow zone, it's going to pop them right back into crisis stage. So to begin with, that's just going to cause them to keep escalating more. It's going to cause them to keep having that threat response over and over. And so if they do that traditional parenting, then it's not going to help their kids. It's going to actually make it worse. But then on top of that, kids with PDA really need a low demand approach. And as parents who are used to traditional parenting, low demand approach feels like, I don't know, sandpaper. It's not something that I would say just comes naturally. It goes against everything we were probably raised as, especially if you're over a certain age and, were raised in the 80s or 90s. Or before, then low demand parenting can feel very uncomfortable. And so if you're doing this, consequence approach, forcing children to do things, which makes sense, you make your kids do chores, or you make them do their homework, you make them talk with you respectfully. They have to understand that, adults are above kids. Like that's kind of that traditional approach. It makes sense. But if you're doing that with a PDA kid, you're going to be activating their threat response over and over and over again. They're always going to be in a state of that panic attack. And so we really need to switch to lowering the demands. And so when you switch, what that actually looks like is I've got 8 kids and all my kids do chores except for my PDA kiddo. I don't make him do chores. I don't make him sit at the dinner table with us when we're eating. I don't make him eat what we eat. And, we have all those lines that we were raised with of, well, I'm not a short order cook and you eat what I make and all those things. You have to let those go, which I can talk about afterwards about setting up boundaries. But with low demand parenting, you just have to get rid of all those things. Even things like, well, we have to bathe every few days. PDA kids have such a hard time with that. And so if you're in a season where they're just not able to do that as often, you have to drop that demand. You have to decide what demand is worth them having a big threat response, panic attack to what you're trying to make them do. And so that's how it kind of differs, because you're really lowering those expectations and you're also trying to bring yourself to the same level as them, which again is a whole other conversation. So that's just a little bit how it might differ from the traditional parenting.
No, that was great. That was really great. And as you're saying that, I am thinking about my son in this as well, right? Like, so when he really will not eat what we have on the table, I'll be like, okay, well, you're hungry, and he loves to cook. So we've been teaching him how to cook. Like he can do a runny egg on rice, and do stuff like that, or make himself a PB&J. I'm like, okay, but we need to how can we make it so it has a protein, a carb, and a veggie in it? What can we do with that? And some days he can't even do that. And that's okay. That's when we do the PB&J. But the other days too, it's like, okay, well, he has total control over going to the kitchen and making whatever it is that he needs to make to get the food in him too, because the not food in him is another stress. And as you were saying too about the showering thing. So Yeah, my son has agreed to showering every second day, which we still forget sometimes. So it's 3 or 4, but it's the changing of t-shirts.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
wears his t-shirt backwards. He has been for about 4 or 5 months now, but he wears his t-shirt backwards, and he wears maybe 2, 3 t-shirts a week. If like 3 is a good week, if he's changed his shirt 3 times a week. And so I've just given him, like, honestly, he changes his underwear every day now. That's been an improvement. So, right, we used to only go through 2 pairs of underwear in a week. And it was just these things where that was just a stress for him, because he's so sensitive in his body to
Yeah.
materials, to things. And those are the 2 or 3 shirts that don't set his nervous system off, that don't rub weird on his body, that don't make him, they help actually keep his stress system regulated.
Yeah.
So I could heighten him by putting him in a shirt that's going to regulate, like upregulate his stress system, and then also going through the argument of doing it, which gets his stress system right dysregulated, instead of trying to look at this other point of view of why does he not want to change this?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, like why? And that's it for all of these things. We start thinking, why are they struggling to brush their teeth? Does that toothbrush feel weird on their teeth? Is the toothpaste too minty for them? Is it, they're struggling to breathe through their nose? Do they feel like they're going to suffocate? Like, what is it? Why are they struggling to do that? And instead of, as soon as they start getting heightened, if we stop and go, okay, why? Instead of going, no, you need to do this.
Yeah, it's one that actually gets missed a lot. And so a lot of kids struggle going to, let's say, karate class or dance class or different things like that. And the parent doesn't realize, oh, they actually have to switch out of their regular outfit into, a karate outfit is very thick and it feels a certain way. And ballet tights are very tight. And, there's different pieces to all of that. And so sometimes parents just don't even realize that, because the child doesn't necessarily know to verbalize that. And so the parent doesn't realize that some of those sensory pieces like clothing are actually the reason that they might be struggling to transition to some of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's the sensory piece, which is so common in the autism as well. So I see definitely that parallel in the profile as well there. Yeah. It's amazing. Okay. So we've got that point first where they're seeing this heightened piece with their child, and they're seeing that they get these really heightened stress responses. This child is going into that shark or the clownfish, or they're going into that turtle so quickly from small things like changing a piece of clothing or not eating what's on the table or not being able to move, or all these things. So that is happening. Now, what do they do about it? Because I know from my personal experience, the school didn't understand it. We don't know where to go, because PDA is so, it's not like you said that you're maybe starting because you're in a different province than me, that you might be bringing this into my province, which would be amazing. And I know even for me with executive functioning coaching, I had to become certified, and I'm in Toronto, one of the largest cities in Canada. And I couldn't find somebody with the executive functioning skills and knowledge to help my son with how deep his struggles were in his executive functioning system in my city. So what does a parent do? So now they understand, and they're like, ooh, I want to check this profile, which you have a list, you said, of that people can kind of go through to check that profile.
That's just the list for autism in general, because
Okay.
you still hit all the DSM criteria. And just a lot of PDA families miss the assessment piece, like they don't get the diagnosis. That's actually a whole other thing. If you want me to share a little bit about that.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. So basically, so there's some divided views on this. So you don't need to have the PDA profile per se in order to get the you don't need it at all to get the autism diagnosis. So you could just go anywhere, get the autism diagnosis, and that's sufficient. And then you can just self-identify as PDA if that's something that you associate with. The problem with not having it written in the report is when you're advocating for the low demand support. So at home as a parent, you can just you know, if you feel like my child matches everything with PDA, they ended up getting the autism diagnosis, you can just switch to doing a low demand approach in your home. But if your child is in the school system, for example, then advocating for that can sometimes be a bit tricky without that being written down. It's not impossible. There's tons of families, because PDA is still so new, that don't have the PDA part written down anywhere. So they just advocate, they have schools that support them, but some schools might not. Or you might have, maybe you're from two families, maybe, you know, you're separated, or your partner lives in a different home. And so you're trying to get that other parent on board with low demand parenting. Like, there's a lot of different examples where having it written down is certainly beneficial. So the first step would be, you know, ideally going to someone who is proficient in PDA. So PDA North America is a website, and they list a lot of PDA affirming professionals all across North America. So you can start by going there. There's also PDA Facebook groups where you can just ask who's been to a psychologist in my area that knows about PDA, or hard to spot. If you can't find someone that's trained in PDA, you want to find someone who is trained in hard to spot. Because what ends up happening is a lot of PDA kiddos, and not just PDA kiddos, but a lot of them end up going to this autism assessment and they end up masking. And so they look like they're doing fine. They're not showing some of these, you know, different DSM criteria, and they end up not getting the diagnosis. So the parents walk away saying, oh, I guess my child's not autistic. And they're left really confused. So my child who's PDA, we had that exact same situation go on. We took him to get him assessed. He did not get the diagnosis, but we knew in our heart something else was still going on. We did not know about PDA at that time. But then we found out about it and discovered, oh, you need to find someone who's experienced and knows all of these different aspects. And so we had him assessed a second time, and he did get the diagnosis. So my first recommendation is for anyone who's ever had their child assessed and they didn't get the diagnosis, but in your gut, you really feel like autism might be going on, then I encourage you to go and do another assessment, but just find someone trained at hard to spot. So when you're talking to the psychologist, you want to ask them, how do you manage masking? How much do you weigh what parents say? So parents need to give a whole bunch of information of what they've seen their children do over, you know, the course of that child's history. If they're not going to weight that very heavily and the child's masking, then they're likely not going to get that diagnosis. But if they weigh the parents' input more heavily, then that diagnosis might still be possible. So you want to find someone who's trained in that. And then if you're lucky and you happen to have someone who's trained in PDA, then that's amazing, because then they can put that in their report. And then you're able to advocate for some of those supports a little bit more. But it is really important to vet your psychologist, because there are a ton of psychologists out there who are a little bit more old school and don't assess with that lens of the masking piece. And then most psychologists are not trained on PDA. More and more are. We're definitely seeing an uptake in that, of them who are, you know, learning about how it presents and the different pieces, but it's just still few and far between, especially in Canada. So the main piece is to at least find someone who's trained in that hard to spot.
And I want to say to any parent that has already tried to get their child diagnosed too, that just, I want them to know that I feel them, because we did a private psychoed eval as well. And so a couple of things with that is, yes, she didn't take in the parents' account very heavily at all. The questions that were asked were like multiple choice, black and white. And I'm like, it's not just black and white. There was a lot of gray in there that was never, ever asked of us. And then the teacher's report was very different on paper when it was being recorded for the psychologist than what was actually happening in school. And the reason why I pulled my son from school, and the reason why I was getting calls 3 to 4 times a week from the teacher to come and pick him up, because his nervous system was like done, and he had either exploded already or was about to explode. And like, this teacher had worked so amazing with me, but because I think they were worried that, this is totally me putting words in his mouth, just maybe rationalizing it for me. I think they were worried about their job, because the way that the principal was very unsupportive of the teachers, that I think they were worried about what would happen to them. Totally understandable. But that didn't go in. And then the therapist also wasn't taking into account me saying, this teacher calls me 3 to 5 times a week to come get my child. Right. And the other things that the teacher and I have worked out, like a code word for my son and all these things, like those things wouldn't happen if nothing was happening in that thing. Yeah. And then the other piece was with this therapist is, I know I talked to her too about auditory processing and the sensitivities. And And it was only after the test that she told me that they don't believe in it because it's not in the DSM, instead of before when I had asked. And so it was just very fascinating. And then when we did the test, she's like, he's so good. And I'm like, yeah. I go, your office is so calming.
Yeah.
The window was open. The lights weren't crazy bright. You have a very calm voice with him. It was just you and him. There were no noises, no sounds. There was no tapping of other kids. There was no sighing. There was no other verbal, auditory overstimulation for him that he could 1,000% mask for her.
Yeah, exactly. And they might not be their safe person either. Even when you're not in an ideal situation, but it's not a safe person, we've seen a lot of PDA kids mask in one home, but not the other. So one parent might be more authoritative and one parent might be doing more low demand. And you might be seeing more of the behaviors in the low demand home at first because that's where they seem safest. And I do want to just note for anyone who is looking to get an assessment, make sure you ask what they're assessing you for, because a lot of families don't realize that there are two different routes to go. So there's a psych ed, which tests for different things like learning disabilities, anxiety, if they include the test ADHD, that is like one side, but the other test is the actual autism test. And they're not the same testing. They're very different. Not all psychologists are trained to do both. Some only do psych eds and not the autism one. And even if they're trained in autism, if they only facilitate a psych ed, they're not going to be able to give that autism diagnosis. So you do want to make sure you ask that before you set up that assessment. Now, a lot of people will do a combination where you get both in one, but you want to make sure and clarify with the psychologist beforehand what they're actually testing for in order to come to their conclusions, because you don't want to accidentally pay all this money for one test and not realize that they haven't done the one that actually checks for autism.
And I think for us, like, so ours did do the autism.
Oh, good.
A mistake, well, but a mistake that I made in doing this, I totally know now, because I know, because I wasn't in this world. I mean, I'm in this world because of my son.
Yeah.
So I did not know at the time that when she's like, I was very confused on what autism was, because our little boy across the street who we love to death, right? It is so different from my son, and he's autistic. And I thought that was what autistic is, in that can't look us in the eyes at all ever, right? And is always looking away and talks about just one subject all the time, and that's it. And like just can't socially is very tough for him and all of that. So I didn't relate. My son, who is very social, gets along with people, you would look at him and think he's just such a very social, easygoing kid, until you speak with him and realize how tough that is for him to actually do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because it's the masking, right? So when I was like, oh no, he doesn't have autism. Like, he doesn't have this. So I as a parent was also brushing it off, I guess, at that point in time. But through going through more and more and learning about PDA, and I do have that, because I think I still have that view in my mind of what autism is and how PDA doesn't present the same way as autism. So I'm like, I think there's that struggle in my mind too, of like, well, how do they do an autism test when he doesn't present that way? And then I'm also still struggling with that piece of like, well, if he gets the autism diagnosis, and I know that the way of helping PDA is different than it is for autism, then it's almost like I feel, and this is just from my experience with schools and stuff, which I did pull my son from school because our experience wasn't great, is that they would focus solely on the autism and not on the PDA, and they would brush the PDA aside.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely complex and layered. I will say, for
Right?
one, if you find the right assessor, for example, our assessor in Alberta, what she will do, you just gave such a great example of that, is she will actually ask the child, how do you feel when you have to look at people? Because you might have a child that is giving eye contact, but they might say, well, it's actually very uncomfortable. It makes me feel cringy. It makes me feel exhausted. I look at people because that's what I see other people doing. So really getting to that why and that feeling underneath what's actually going on, like, even with friends as well. So a good psychologist is going to ask how the child is experiencing it, not just looking at it from the outside of, oh yeah, you give eye contact, then that's fine. So that's one piece. But then another piece to remember is that autism is a spectrum. So, you were talking about how, well, it doesn't look like what I know it to look like. We don't know what we don't know, first of all. So, a little short thing. I've got 3 kids that are diagnosed autistic, but I only had 2 up until a couple months ago. And I happened to take a workshop by Donna Henderson. I cannot recommend Donna Henderson enough. If you are listening today, go check her out. She is the author of the book, Is This Autism? I highly recommend getting the book. She also has a ton of YouTube videos. She has courses. If you can do anything with Donna Henderson, I recommend it. She is so skilled at hard to spot. And so I was taking a training as a staff member. All of our staff were taking this training. I live in the autism world. I live in the PDA world. I don't do assessments or anything like that because I'm just a social worker, but I do live this world. But as she was talking about how hard to spot can present and different things to look for, I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds just like my 16-year-old daughter. So we had her assessed, and sure enough, she ended up getting the diagnosis of autism. And, she had kind of been talking to me about it over the last year, but she has a lot of other diagnoses. And so I kind of just chalked it up to, oh, it's just that, or it's just that. So the more you learn about it, the more you learn about some of those hard to spot nuances, the more it will come to make sense. But there's also this piece about, a lot of kids who get the autism diagnosis get labeled as high functioning or level 1, level 2, level 3. They used to use the term Asperger's. And so I think that's where a lot of it comes into play, where people think, oh, well, that's not what autism looks like that I've ever seen, because people are thinking of a certain area of the spectrum when you can really be on any area of the spectrum. But also there's like actually many different spectrums within the autism spectrum, because you might function really well cognitively up here, but you might be really low down here on social skills. You might be higher up here on emotional functioning, but lower on another area here. So it really depends on what aspect you're talking about, because it's unfair sometimes to kids who present as high functioning, because it then diminishes some of their other struggles, because they might struggle immensely with social activities or emotional regulation or executive functioning, like you've said. Those pieces can be really hard, but because maybe cognitively they're super advanced, people don't recognize how hard some of those other pieces are for them. So that's where that spectrum comes into play, that they might not all look the same, people who are autistic, because it's a very wide field of how everyone has little bits from, here and there and here and there of things that they are stronger in, things that they aren't, things that are their special interest. Other people might have a different special interest. Someone might stim by flapping their arms, which is really noticeable for a lot of people, but someone else might stim with humming. And so humming might not be as noticeable, or it's more socially accepted. So there's just so many different pieces to it.
And that's the thing that I'm learning the more that I get into this, exactly as you're saying. My thoughts and views when we did that psychoed eval, I've grown so much since then, but then I have so much to go. And as you're saying too, I mean, this is what you're trained in. And a few months ago, you realized, oh, there's another piece I didn't know. And so I just want the parents too that are listening to just understand that there is so much involved in this and under this lid. And that if you do end up going to somebody for testing, that you find out later, oh, there were some gaps and holes and stuff. Don't think, oh, I've made this huge mistake or stuff. Like, we did what we did with the knowledge that we had at that point in time. And now that Amanda is giving us all this amazing knowledge today, like, this is gold. Everything you're giving us is so important, that we're still, with this knowledge, going to make mistakes along the way. It's still going, okay, so this didn't work, or this, my gut is telling me something else from here. Now I need to ask more questions from somebody else to figure that out. Like, I have written down, I've got Donna Henderson, Is This Autism? Like, that's, I've got that started on my note paper right now. Like, I'm definitely going to be getting that, because it fascinates me, because there's other things you said about my one son that doesn't answer questions. He got the silent but deadly award at school. So once he does finally answer something, like, the teacher's like, he has so much amazing knowledge and thoughts, but he doesn't speak. He won't order from a coffee shop. Like, he won't order something at a counter. He won't do those things.
Yep. That was my teen guy. Yep. Yeah.
right? So I'm curious to find out if both of my kids are maybe in that autism spectrum. And without me realizing, my one son, because he doesn't have the PDA, is not totally outright, just that quiet piece would be so fascinating.
Because remember, one of the threat responses is the freeze. And
Yes.
that is that situational mutism. And so a lot of people don't recognize what situational mutism is. And sometimes what, you'll see parents that are like, why aren't you answering me? And they're getting all escalated themselves, and the parents are becoming dysregulated, and they're not understanding. It's because your child's nervous system has shut down. And so they have gone mute, and they just don't realize that is what is going on. Or like you say, the anxiety, which is a huge piece of PDA, takes over. My daughter, she can't order food herself either. She can sometimes if she has what she likes to refer to as an emotional support sibling. And so if she has someone with her, sometimes she can get herself to do it. So she'll even take her younger PDA brother with her, who himself would not order either, but just having someone there with her is enough to kind of make it that she's able to order it. But the situational mutism is a huge one.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because I never recommend like this episode has been so amazing for me. I'm so grateful as well. Okay, I do want to just kind of do a bit of a recap of what we have said because there's been so much in here. So, if we're going to do just a quick recap of what a parent would see with PDA, what steps should they take in order to help that child, like to start getting the diagnosis, and then what to do after they have the diagnosis. We've talked through these three. Can you maybe give a quick recap of that for people that were just listening?
Yeah, so if you are noticing that your child is having some big responses or internal responses to demands, also, we didn't really have time to talk about this today, but if you are seeing that they seem to have issues with other people around them. So an example, it's called equalizing or leveling. So I'm just going to mention this really fast, but if they've got siblings and all of a sudden your child is sitting in one room, happy as a clam, doing their own thing, and you've got two other siblings playing a board game, and the PDA kiddo comes over and just knocks the board game over for what seems like no reason, and you're like, what just happened? If you've got sibling interactions that are happening like that often, that's because they perceive that they are not at the same level as their siblings anymore. Their siblings are having fun and they aren't, or their siblings are involved in something and they're not. So if you are seeing pieces around that as well, and it seems like it's across every area of their life, and you've noticed some of these autism traits, you can look up the DSM criteria if you Google it. If you Google Donna Henderson DSM traits, you will likely find her sheet that goes through some of the more out of the box suggestions. Then my recommendation is to get an assessment. When you go to do the assessment, make sure you ask all the questions of the assessor that A, they're doing an autism assessment, B, how do they manage masking and hard to spot kids? Do they ask the children how they experience things internally? And how much do they weigh the parents' input if the child is going to be masking during that appointment? And if they know about PDA. If they don't know about PDA, that's fine, but you want them to at least know about some of those harder to spot pieces. Then once you get the diagnosis, then you're going to want to switch to that low demand parenting. I really suggest looking up Christy Forbes if you are suspecting PDA. She is amazing. She's got an online course called In Tune Pathways, and it's Christy with a K, Christy Forbes. She's out of Australia. It is the most comprehensive course that I've seen so far. She's PDA herself. She's raising PDA kids. Amanda Diekman also has a book on low demand parenting. Stuart Shanker has a book called Self-Reg, which is amazing. And then Ross Green, a lot of people have already read this, but The Explosive Child, really great book. And can be very helpful with PDA kids. So these are some of the things we would do after, and then just doing that low demand approach. Once you do the low demand approach, though, you want to be doing it across all areas. So you want to implement that into your own home, and you want to implement that into the school, which is going to require a bit of advocacy. If you're trying to get people on board, then doing some courses. I've got a course actually for family members and grandparents. So if you have, family members that are like, oh, it's just your parenting, around, you're not being strict enough, you're not disciplining them enough, then that's something that you can go check out. That's helpful to get them on board and really understanding that PDA route. There's also a couple great books on Amazon for teachers that are all about PDA and the education system so that they can reduce demands at school. Although, to be honest, a lot of PDA families do end up homeschooling just because the school is filled with so many demands. So that's kind of the approach that I'd be taking, and just continue to learn. It's such a big learning journey. And the more parents understand what PDA is and what the threat response is and how and why their kids are responding the way that they are, the more parents will be able to self-regulate their own responses and understand what's going on and not feel so upset or so hurt about some of the things that might happen when the child's having that threat response.
That was amazing. I was trying to write down so many of the resources you said, and I'm like, I got to the point where I'm like, nah, you know what? I'm just going to take the recording and the transcript after. Amazing. Yeah. So Donna Henderson and Christy Forbes are the two that I will definitely be diving into first. But man, and I know Ross Green. So I didn't know Amanda and the other one you mentioned, but oh my goodness, so amazing.
Yes, and if you follow me, I've got a couple accounts on Instagram. One is our clinic, Deer Creek Therapy, and so we post. I think my book recommendation list is right on my Instagram account, so you can go look that up and not have to write it all down. And then I have another one, the Neurodivergent Bunch, and it's the_neurodivergent_bunch, and that's where I share just little clips about a lot of pieces. It focuses primarily on PDA, but not exclusively on PDA, and so it's just another helpful resource. NeuroWild is one I often recommend as well. NeuroWild, she's on Facebook.
That's great.
She has so much good information out there. So I always love recommending her too.
Yeah. Okay. So I know for our show notes, I have your amandapreston.co website.
Yeah.
And then you said the Deer Creek Therapy. What is it? That is the one that would have the book list?
Yes. Yep. And I think there's a resource page on our website as well that lists a ton of different links and all sorts of things there too. It's Deer Creek Therapy is Canada based. So we help people primarily in Alberta. We're trying to expand to Ontario, but I am registered to support families in Ontario anyways. However, I also have the Amanda Preston company, which does parent coaching anywhere. So if you live in the US, if you live in the UK, wherever you might be, I can offer support there as well. If you're just struggling with how to implement some of these things, because at the end of the day, PDA kids don't often do very well with therapy. And so we're trying to not change the child, we're trying to change the environment. So parent support is what I usually recommend, what most PDA professionals recommend, so that we can just change the way we're approaching our kids, lowering those demands, and getting their nervous system to calm down.
So awesome you're saying that, because in my support circle as well, I'm literally going through the whole module about understanding the stress systems and really diving into those animals, and the next one of things you can start doing as well. Yeah, so I love how paralleled we are on all of this. Okay, so I have all your links that will be going. I have your 2 Instagrams and I have your websites, and I'll point to people which website to be going through for the resources and book list, and which one is for and this one is just for Canada. I'm just writing down that for myself. And then the Amanda Preston is for all over. Okay, I will have that in the show notes. So when people go in, just go down to the show notes, and that's where all of Amanda's links will be. And I'll let you know which ones were which that she just said right now. Amazing. Amanda, this was beyond amazing for me. I've learned so much, and I'm so curious about my other son that I didn't realize about. That mutism is just.
Yeah. This happens so often.
Yeah, this has just been fascinating. So before we go, so they have how to contact you and all that. Before we go, is there anything that we have not covered that you feel, and you did just say something too about something you hadn't covered, and I was like, oh, that's my son too. So where they explode with other people, and it is just in games or doing things with somebody else, they all of a sudden explode with them, and we're like, why do they just get so upset at that individual? Right? Yeah, it's fascinating. So yeah, anything else though that you feel that our audience needs to know or hasn't heard yet that I didn't ask or we haven't talked about?
I guess maybe just to expand a little bit on that is sometimes if you are sensing that your child is about to get escalated, something has triggered them and you're like, oh, I can see it about to happen, and they've got that PDA profile, then what can help is to actually make you get down to that child's level so that they don't feel like that hierarchy piece has come out of sync. And so what that might look like, for example, is, let's say, your kid swears at you or kicks or something like that. You're going to like crouch your body down. My husband does this a lot and it's quite effective. And he starts to go, oh, you want to fight? You want to fight? And he does like a humor thing. His body is coming down to the height of my son and he's playing around. Now that doesn't feel like the right response if your child has maybe just sworn at you or something, but it gets them to like, oh, like they're acting like a kid. I'm a kid. We're at that same level. It can actually be just enough to keep them out of that, going up to that crisis mode. And then also this one sounds really, you don't want to like patronize kids with different things like, oh, you should go use a fidget because I can tell that you're getting escalated. But a lollipop and bubble gum are actually two things that don't seem as patronizing. They're sugary, so kids will happily take it. I know sugar is not ideal, but honestly, at the end of the day, if you're trying to avoid a meltdown, sometimes that's better. But what happens is when you do the sucking motion or you do the chewing motion, it activates that proprioceptive input and actually releases chemicals in your brain to calm down. So sometimes that might be just enough. If they're not too escalated, like don't go offering a lollipop in the midst of a intense crisis or panic attack. But if they're at the very beginning and you think it will be okay to, it'll be well received at that time, doing that might be just enough to keep them from getting escalated as well.
Yeah, no, food is amazing. I've always got a stash of his favorites and my background's all nutrition, right? And I'm like, well, no, if he wants these corn chips at a certain time, if I see that he's starting to get amped up, I'm like, hey, why don't we have a snack? And I'll get out like the favorites or the Cliff Bars he just picked out or whatever it is, right? Like sometimes we'll just go to the bulk barn and he'll pick a bunch of things and then I have them on hand to take out when I need them.
Oh, perfect.
But there's stuff he's picked that he wants. And yeah, and it's these are all tools to have in our toolbox to definitely help our kids. Amazing. All right, Amanda, I am so grateful for everything you shared. Yeah, I'm just super excited. Anybody that wants to contact Amanda, please go down to the show notes. And that is where I will have everything in the show notes of Amanda's contact information. If there's any questions you have, reach out to Amanda. Just thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. It was great.
Amazing. Thank you. All right, everybody, this has been such a great episode. If you would like to also work with me, you can click on the link to go to my support circle where I do work on all nervous system regulation. I work on executive functioning with parents, helping them understand it and helping them change that way of parenting as well, as we spoke of for your kids. And if you would like to speak with me as well, you can go to the link and as well down there in the show notes to book a call with me and ask me any other questions that you have. All right. Thank you for listening today, and we will see you in the next episode.